Hey, what's up YouTube? My name's Alckemy. Welcome to the channel. If you have been paying attention to the channel, you know that I totally bagged on the newly released trash from Isotope / Native Instruments, and I'm pretty salty about it. And I am here to tell you why very quickly. But what I do offer is a Bitwig solution that we will be building from scratch here in just a minute. Before I go any further, let's just talk about why I reacted strongly, I would say, to what they released versus what we had from before. And it is a damn shame that Trash 2 is no longer available for purchase, because it is, well, it was rather the best distortion module that you could get. So I'm going to quickly walk you through the anatomy of what Trash 2 had to offer, and then we'll talk about what it no longer has, and then we'll get to the building process. And if you are interested in this remotely at all whatsoever, especially if you're a newcomer in music and you're like, why is everybody upset? I'm here to kind of educate you on that matter for the most part. You'll see that this is not interactable, and I don't have Trash 2 on my newer computer, so I can't pull up the VST, but we will be talking about how to build this in stages. So the most important thing for me, if you look at this thing, this is a customizable wave shaper. And even though there's a bunch of presets right here, you'll see that there are 2 stages of this, but you can actually click on this and draw in your own curves. And this was great because the way that a wave shaper works, typically speaking, it also depends on what quadrant you're working with and whatnot, but typically speaking, the quiet parts of a sound are over on the left, and then the louder parts of a sound are over on the right. And so by making these weird wonky shapes, you take some parts of the sound that are kind of quiet and you make those really loud, and then you take some parts of the sound that are really loud and perhaps make them a little bit more subtle. And when you get this amalgamation in between the two, you get a lot of audio artifacts. Sorry, I know that was a mouthful, but that was the coolest thing about it, was especially if you're using weird sounds in the first place, like mud pies, XYZ, whatever. So that feature is not available in the new edition of Trash. They now have this morphable thing to where you can morph between 4 different distortion curves. And in my experience, the morphing aspect of it was extremely subtle. And for a distortion unit, to me, it felt like a marketing thing, you know. I'm not saying that's what their intention was, but the fact that it was not nearly as extreme, nearly as versatile as this guy, that was kind of like, all right, well, color me disappointed. So one of the big things that you'll see at the bottom is that there are a bunch of other elements that you can utilize, and also a modularity aspect to it, to where if you go, I think it was the graph, that you can change and organize the filter to the Trash to the filter 2, which I don't think that Trash has a filter 2, there's only one, and then the convolve, and then also the dynamics and delay are missing, which is a multi-band compressor. So that's silly to me. Yeah, it's cheaper, but at one point in time, they were giving this away for free, if I'm not mistaken, or for $20, and that stinks. So what we need in order to build this are basically, if we look at this chain here, we need filter 1, we need distortion, filter 2, and this is just bare minimum, convolution reverb, some kind of multi-band dynamics, some kind of delay. Now the cool thing is, if you think about this, because Bitwig has a bunch of tools, and because you'll see that the Trash aspect of this is multiband, in theory, we could create a couple of different versions of this that would be suitable. And something else that I think would be interesting to keep too is this has an oscilloscope on it, so we might want to include an oscilloscope within our device. Now, if you are an advanced sound designer, you're going to know exactly where to go in order to rebuild something like this. But if you're not an advanced sound designer, well, then I'm going to walk you through this, and I'm going to be giving away this patch to any of my ARCANUM members. Otherwise, I'm sorry, you're going to have to put a little bit of work into it, and I'm going to make you suffer. Just kidding. So, one thing that we are going to give up is, we don't actually need that. Yeah, but one thing that we are going to give up is the 4th band. Now, something that we can do theoretically is create a whole nother band right here. So I guess what we could do, this isn't even worth it, to be honest, but you could create a secondary band right here, or create a split right here, and then just use a low pass filter and then a high pass filter, and then on this guy figure out what frequency range that is and then mute that. But there's going to be so much crossover and so much fine tuning to work with that doing frequency splitting within, nope, I changed my mind. here's what we're going to do. We're going to go into this, and then we're going to go into effects 2. And we're just going to set this crossover here at, what is the low? So this is 141. So if you were to split 144 hertz by 8, we can set this to like 4K. So in theory, if you really wanted to do something like this, then I guess you could. I have not prepared this, and we're kind of doing this off of a whim. That's how I like to do sound design, because that way you know it's authentic, as opposed to follow the patch. I've done that. I don't really like doing it, but here you go. So we've got a low band. We've got a crossover right here. If you adjust this, then you're probably going to want to try to split the difference in the middle as well. But yeah, this is a 4-band frequency splitter. So the next thing that we want to do is we're going to grab a filter plus, and this is actually going to be the majority of the work. So behind this, I'm just going to copy this, and we are going to paste this inside of the low here. We're going to paste this inside of, actually I have to click and drag, but now we've got one on the high end. Then if we click, sorry, we've got one on the mid-high end rather. And then what we're going to do is we are going to copy pasta this inside of the high. This takes care of your distortion part. Is it going to sound like crap? Who knows? I have nothing on here yet. But within the filter plus, this takes care of both the distortion and the filter. And I can do you one better. If you really want to get down and dirty with it, you can even do some customization, like adding a sweep to any of these bands, because now you've got 2 filters. You also have a distortion unit that is in between here. I'm going to stick with the filter on this. I do like options, and if they come to me as I'm teaching this, then I'll mention them. If I don't, then feel free to put them in the comments. I probably know about it, but whatever. So in regards to the most important thing here, we actually have a customizable wave shaper, which oddly this is the default one, and I would not recommend using this, but if we go right click and we go reset curve, there you go. You've got a customizable wave shaper that does behave, albeit a little bit different than what we're used to, especially with regular things, but we can create some basic saturation with something like this that creates a sine curve. Remember, maybe if I pull this up, this might have some explanations of as what transfer is doing. So how's this wave shaper? Scroll down on this. I do want to talk and see if this has any explanation about what transit actually does. So it doesn't, but what I can do is I can pull this into the effects grid, which you can also do some frequency splitting on that if you prefer. I think it's a little bit more troublesome. But if we type in shaper here and we find the actual transfer thing, we click on this. Now if we go to this one, I think that this is good. So signal to be processed, on click, drive amount, inspector parameters. I'm trying to see if this has an explanation about what exactly is happening on here. Editor. So that's kind of a shame. Honestly, Bitwig does such a cool job at like teaching you how to use this thing, because they have show help for every device, but this doesn't actually get into the details. It just shows you or tells you that there's some functionality, but you can look up what a wave shaper is supposed to do. Anyways, because we have this on every single device, we can actually use customizable stuff, or what you could do is just see that this is a soft curve anyway, if you take a look, and that becomes a little bit more squarified, whatever. And you can create all different kinds of shapes and whatnot with what you are trying to utilize. And the cool thing about this too is that we've actually got a lot of different filtering options, because we can set anything of the filters here and also just very quickly scroll through all of the options, you know. So the XP in particular has all of these different ones. Some of the new filter types are the fizz, risp, and ripple, so you can, you know, go ham with something like that. And then on the high end, of course, you've got your control on there as well. Now this can get pretty freaking crazy, so the next thing that we're going to add on the outside of this is a limiter. Or if you don't want to use the peak limiter, which I wouldn't recommend anyways, something that I'm going to do right now is a test for you all just to see if this works, because sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. It's weird. Theoretically, Bitwig has a clipper built into it via the push and the heat, and it usually keeps the sound, if you're using the push, from going over, I think like 1.2 or minus 1.2 decibels or something of the sort. So I think that before I go any further, I just want to see if this current version is working. We're going to start with an FM4. And what I'm going to do here is we're going to throw this filter on here, and I'm going to duplicate this because we can drive the hell out of this. But if I were to play this, I need to turn this other guy off. Let's just do a quick example to where we can see the decibel rating over here, and then we're going to turn this up. If it goes into the red, that means that this is not working. If it does not go into the red, that means that it's working as intended. So let's find out. That's so quiet. Let's do another one. Another one. 5 of these. Yeah, so we're chilling at minus 1.3 with, oh my God, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 280 decibels of gain going into the push. I think that we're going to be okay on that front. So guess what? Bitwig has a built-in clipper now. It's not perfect, but it is nice that we have something like that, and that means that we can utilize this as a clipper instead of a limiter. Now, 2 reasons for clipping. One, because it ends up rounding out the shape whenever you push something into it, so that's really good for things like distortion. The other thing is that the peak limiter on Bitwig leaves a lot left to be desired, and it is kind of cool that we actually have an overall filter now. So at the end of this chain, we can just leave this on. We can turn the filter off. It's cool that we actually have a mix on here. And one thing that you want to make sure that you don't do if you're wanting to clip it is just leave this at 0, because whatever you send into it is going to make sure that that maintains that level cap with decibel ratings, which does not equate to loudness, but that's a whole different video. Cool. So the next piece of this is we need a gate. And we can, the thing with this as a means of customization and stuff is that we can actually do one of 2 options, or many different options really, because who cares, but we can create a multi-band gate if we want to. We can also just leave the gate as is, and something else that we can consider is we can create a multi-band dynamics just from having this available here. So the layout of this is going to look a little bit different, but it still stands of us being able to utilize, we need 4 of these, I guess. So 2, and you can have more if you want, I guess, and that's kind of the cool thing behind the modularity of Bitwig, and that's part of the reason why I like Bitwig, is because they're like, hey, if you don't have it, you can build it, and the flexibility behind this is great. But yeah, we can take 1 more of these and toss that onto the high end now. And so now we've got a low end compressor, we've got a middle compressor, so we've got the low end on this, as you can see, and then the high end, and then we also have, we don't need 2 of those, and then we also have a high dynamics, so that takes care of the compression part. The next thing that we have is a convolver, or convolution, I guess, rather, and so you can put any kind of sample into this, you can drag anything in here and start to mess with this. We're just going to leave it on for now because I'm not really concerned. We don't even have any sound that's going on right now. And then let's see, we've got the filters, we have that. Am I missing anything? Filter, convolve, dynamics, and then of course a delay, which I would recommend using a delay plus. So within this rack here, we've essentially built a bootleg version of Trash 2. We'll call this Trash Bitwig version. Why don't we just rename that? And now that we have this, we can start utilizing this distortion, this multi-band distortion, into, you know, whatever we want, you know. So let's call this Trash Bitwig version. And I guess the only thing that would be left to do is let's go ahead and create some kind of respace or something, because that is the same test that I did from before. And let's go ahead and pump this thing up and see if we can make something cool with it. So I'm going to turn this off for now. And very quickly, I'm just going to set the unison to 2 voices and turn the stereo down. So we've got a filter on here. We don't want that. We're just going to turn that off. And then we're going to turn off that. We're going to turn this up a bit to 0. And then we are going to detune this. Let's turn the drive up. Cool. It's a nice fat sound. So let's turn this on. Let's double check to make sure that this isn't going to go over 0. I think we're okay. Okay, so now we can start from the low end and we can turn this off for a hot second and start to see if we can build something interesting with the transfer. Let's go ahead and solo this. kind of nice. Generally, I leave the lows alone, but it is available. And if you want to do some kind of filtering, especially if you're trying to create some kind of neurobase or something, this was not supposed to be a neurobase tutorial, but we can add in some kind of modulator as well. So that's pretty sick. We can be like, let's go a smooth random. Let's go ahead and set this to go upward. What I'm going to do is move this all the way down. So that way we're cutting as little bass as possible. And then now we can mess around with the speed of this in order to kind of create something more volatile. So something that I absolutely love about Bitwig, and I hope that they create more devices with this, is that if I want to change this filter, I can actually just change this into something else. So I can be like, let's try the XP, or let's try the Alckemy. There's the ladder filter, I think that's supposed to be modeled after the Moog. So if you like that kind of stuff, then that's available as well. Let me see, we got the fizz on here, we got the rasp, which is a low pass. Okay, we're gonna maybe stick to like a solid key and just do like a high pass too. We've also got some drive here as well. So we have not only distortion, but we also have drive in case if you're taking out too much. So let's be a little extreme. It's not really necessary, but that is something that is available. Now what we can do is we can check the levels of this, and we can turn the attack and release all the way down. The low threshold is fine. What we want to do is create a curve that looks like a knee, or kind of like a jagged thing. And so we're going to turn the ratio up, and that looks a little bit more like a compressor. And then we can kind of adjust this according to where we want to set this and match it with the gain. You're going to have to use your ears on this, because even though we have a clipper on here, and theoretically it shouldn't go over that 0 dB mark, as you can see it has not destroyed that yet, you don't actually know how much dynamics you're pushing back into it. So this can also be used as a sense of drive. I don't want to say distortion, but that, I guess, yeah, you can add harmonics in. And if you go the opposite way with this low threshold to where you turn the ratio up on this, now you're actually getting into some wave shaping as well. But the difference is that wave shaping is immediate to the waveform, where this is actually an adjustment over time, which is kind of interesting. But just let that be known that that's a thing. So really we can do this to everything else as well. And now that we have that, we can flip over to the mids. Now on the mids, there's a bunch of stuff that we can do. I would probably prefer to use sweep on the mids, but that's okay. Let's just go ahead and keep working with what we got. I'm going to pull out the reds here. We're going to go filter. We're going to push this up a little bit. And maybe what I want to do with this one is, instead of using a low pass, I'm going to use some kind of band pass. And then we can go into this and use a random. This is all just for academic purposes as well. I don't really know if the sound is going to be cool or not. It's also really late at night, but I wanted to kind of get this out and just tell a cool story. But now we can set this maybe to bipolar, and we can also change the distortion modes on here. So this has gain match on it, I believe. So if we click on that, there's no way to control that. So typically within saturator, there's some kind of gain, auto gain. Maybe we can just stick with heat or soar or diode. Cool, so there's that. Now what we can do is go click on this. You might see that I've got this guy on here. You don't need that. This is more so for how I used to mono low end, and I don't actually do that anymore, so it's just irrelevant. But what we can do on this guy is maybe use a notch filter. So we've got a band pass on the low mids and a notch filter on the mid highs. And the more efficient way to do this would actually just be to duplicate that and then paste it into the mid highs. But for the sake of continuity of, you can see how I go from one place to the other, we're just going to leave it as is. But we can start to filter those high mids here and utilize something like this, and then also play with the distortion while we solo this. So there we go. So great. Now that we have both of these, we can turn the dynamics on, and also give that some multiband compression if we want to, because maybe the signal's too high, or maybe, you know, for whatever reason, it's just a little bit too much. Please do not try to copy the settings of what I'm doing with this compression stuff. I'm not listening to the sound, and I'm not even like really paying attention to it, because it's unimportant. It's more about the workflow and about how you can utilize this to control other stuff and also explore and have fun, right? One thing I am going to do is I'm going to turn the attack and release off of this though. Cool. So same thing, last thing, I guess we can turn this into a low pass filter, and then we will do our rando. Turn the drive up just a little bit and set this to go almost all the way down. Actually, we can't set it all the way down because it's only on the high end. But you see, like, we've rebuilt all of the components that are within the trash family here, as you can see. And even though there's different delay modes, there's different, you know, convolution modes and whatnot, a lot of that stuff is customizable. Like, you can replace, instead of using a delay, like you could utilize the delay 2, the delay 4. I personally like the delay plus. I think that it sounds the best. It has some really cool, like, almost reverb options. So there's that, but, you know, we'll talk more about that here in a second. I also want to talk about why you might want to use the gate in a typical use case. So let's go ahead and adjust this, turn the ratio up. RNE, attack and release. We can push the highs just a little bit. I think that I'm soloing something. Yeah, I'm soloing this, so little shrieky. Let's go ahead and turn the output up just a bit. So in this case, this is only pushing up the high end, so this is where this might make sense to actually bring this up a little bit. And then we can bring this down a little bit. So now we're going to have a little bit more of a consistent sound. You see how this is actually bringing up the signal now? So sometimes having a weird ass curve like this can sometimes be useful. So now that we have that, we've pretty much got a fully fledged distortion, multiband distortion unit, which is dope. And now with all this, you know, for whatever reason, if you have a tail, or like, let's say you've got this convolution that's coming into this like so, typically speaking, something that you might want to consider is creating a group, but whatever, we'll just leave it as is. So let's say I want to utilize this for whatever reason. One thing that I am going to do is I'm going to push the volume of this because it's still relatively quiet. So yeah, it looks like we're doing some really heavy compression. So we can kind of take a tool and push up the overall gain of this. And you could also do it with another filter plus, but for whatever reason, again, if you got some kind of tail, so right, you hear all that, you can utilize the gate here to turn the threshold up, and that'll cut it off immediately. So that's where you can utilize. Also, you can do some really cool stuff with different kinds of gate options, especially in means of rhythm. You know, for example, if you were to utilize like steps or something, then that's definitely something that you can just kind of play this along, play this too. We need to maybe make that a little bit faster because it's a little boring, but so we can set that to like 30 seconds. So yeah, you could do something cool with the gate, kind of like what I was describing from before. If you don't like it, you can just turn that off. But that takes care of the gate. And then with the delay, you can set up all different kinds of stuff and modulation as well. Something that I like about the delay plus a lot is the, what is this called? The blur amount, which basically creates diffusion on the delay. It's pretty sick. So typically, if you just want to have a regular delay, you can absolutely do something like this, to where we're just going to be like, yo, I want to delay the signal and maybe pull out the low end of this. So or if you want to create something that's more akin to a reverb, then you can actually use this low high here to create like really cool sounds out of this. We can turn on the ducking. We can also create a really short delay like this. And that creates some really cool sounds like that. Make sure that we're not clicking. This is actually the line. This is 1.1. Okay, so it doesn't look like that's actually a true clipper. I'm glad that I figured that out, because even though we left this at 0, we pushed that up way too hard. So it might make sense to just leave a peak limiter. I knew that I wasn't crazy. In most cases, it's weird. If you just push the distortion, then it'll stay. But now that we have this, no matter how loud we go with this guy, reset that, this will not go over 0 dB. Obviously, that's starting to color the sound a little bit too much, but hey, just let it be known. Maybe something that we can do is find a nice middle ground. Obviously, this is great for making dystopian types of sounds and crazy ass things that you can utilize. But the cool thing about this is that we can actually go back and forth and start to change the order of how you want to work with all of these. The only thing that I would say is, if you want to move the distortion around, then you want to move the entire rack, which is totally fine. So let's say I want, we'll call this a shaper rack. Excuse me. But this is essentially your distortion unit. So now that you have something like that, you can utilize this and place it over here. I would keep it before the filter and the peak limiter. You can do what you want, have fun, maybe even before the tool, so these three can kind of just stay where they need to be. But within the shaper rack now, this could be the last thing that you want to utilize, and then you can also apply individual gain to each one. But I don't know what this is going to sound like. Let's maybe give it a shot. Maybe we can play with the overall pitch and see if we can get some cool movement. Cool. So maybe you're like, hey, this is kind of cool, but maybe on this, instead of having a bandpass, I want this to be a notch as well. Or maybe I want them both to be bandpasses. The other thing too is that you can actually automate these curves. So if you want to create something like this, then you can actually utilize, oops, I did the wrong thing, I'm sorry. You can change the crossover, rather, about this coming down to say, I don't know, they do that in semitones. It's kind of odd. I don't think that's a good move, but you'll see that the crossover is moving now, and you can get some more stuff that can be kind of neat, especially if we turn up the speed. So the reason why this is interesting is that even though there could be some phase problems up here, it's not going to matter because our low end is solid. But the cool thing is that if you recall, we actually have a low pass filter, so it's going to change the depth of how low this can go. So oh, I had that solo. I didn't realize that. I was wondering. I was like, this sounds kind of... There we go. And we could blow this out of the water if we want to. Like, we can make this as insane as you would like this to go, because we have all the different distortion types. We can actually add more distortion. And something that I love about Bitwig is that this took no trouble to set up. So yeah, that's available. If you have any questions or whatever, like, of course it's not exact, and it's not necessarily meant to be exact, but the thing is that it should be enough in order to kind of hold you over if you were thinking about getting Trash 2, or if you were missing, you know, for whatever reason, Trash 2, or you like, I can't support their new plugin, man. And it sucks because, yeah, Trash 2 was, like, at the time the best distortion unit on the market, and now I believe that it's been surpassed by several other things. Rift comes to mind, Bitwig's distortion units come to mind. Some people say that Roar is the new successor, but Roar doesn't have a custom wave shaper, and it's cool. It's got tons of drive and tons of stuff on it, but yeah, it also has the feedback, so there is some kind of delay thing on there as well. So maybe, like, I'll give it like half credit, I guess. But anyways, hopefully that was interesting to you. This is how you can build this. And like I said, I'll leave this for all of the ARCANUM members. And honestly, with the ARCANUM stuff, I've got really cool masterclasses that I go really in depth into stuff anyways, so it'll be worth your time. Thank you guys. I really appreciate it. Let me know if you have any questions, and happy producing.